In the last section, we started talking about deployment objects. Remember, a deployment is going to run and manage a set of identical pods. From this point forward, throughout this course, we are no longer going to create pods ourselves manually. Instead, we're going to create deployments that will create pods for us. So deployments are appropriate for use in both a development and production environment. We're going to make a deployment that has a pod template that's going to try to create a container using the image multi-client, and we're going to make sure that port 3000 is exposed. Now, the reason we're going to make a deployment with multi-client and port 3000 open is so that we can test this out in the browser once the deployment creates our actual pod. So to make a deployment, we're going to use the same process that we use for every other object that we're ever going to create with Kubernetes. We're going to make a configuration file and then feed that configuration file into kubectl. So inside of my code editor, I'm going to create a new configuration file inside of my root project directory. And I'll give this file a name of client-deployment.yaml. And then inside this file, we're going to add all of our configuration to describe this new deployment that we're making. We're going to write out all the configuration together right now, and then we'll talk about the purpose of every line immediately after that. So I'll get started by writing out API version, and I'll say apps/v1. I'll specify kind of deployment. So these two lines right here, I bet you can guess what's going on. We are saying that we want to use an object that is defined inside the API version of apps/v1. And the specific type of object that we want to create is a deployment. Next up, we'll put down our metadata section. And we'll give this thing a name of client-deployment. Then we'll do our spec after that. For the spec, we'll say replicas is 1. I'll add on a selector with match labels and a component web property like so. I'll then unindent, so I now only have one indent right here. I'll say template. I'll put in metadata, labels, component web. I'm going to unindent again so that I'm on the same indentation layer as metadata. I'll say spec, containers, and we'll define the list of containers that we want created with every pod that is controlled by this deployment. So this is an array entry, so I'll put in my little dash like so, and I'll say that I want a pod that has a name, or excuse me, a container in this pod with a name of client. I want it to run the image of my Docker ID / multi-client, and then finally we'll set up that port mapping. So I'll say ports with a container port of 3000, like so. Okay, so some things inside this file might look a little bit familiar. Let's take a quick pause. We're going to come back to the next section and start breaking this thing down line by line. So I'll see you in just a minute.